Jules, what do you feel about people using plastic surgery to deal with body issues?
I think I'm gonna struggle a little bit to use words that aren't gonna offend every single person who has plastic surgery done.
Sure.
But I think it's horrible, man. I think it's the worst thing ever. Aside from the thing that, okay, so I mean, people can have different opinions on how it looks and on health risks and whatever. But I think just in relation to body image issues, I think it opens the box of Pandora, honestly. It is just like, oh, I don't like this part of myself. There is a way to improve that, Like, but where does it stop? Like, how many times are you gonna think that? I mean, not sure
Uh-huh.
about you, but I throughout my life, I had an issue with almost every part of my body at some point. Glad I didn't remove it and replace it.
Cut your junk off.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure. I thought about, like, I've said this before, but for my height, like crazy stuff like limb lengthening and researching breaking your legs and stuff, which now just seems insane to me.
It's crazy what people will do to themselves to look better.
For me, it's like you said, there's one argument that is obvious. Like we've said this before. I think practically most plastic surgery is still in like beta mode, right? It's still often noticeable. Even when people are like, no, you can't notice the work done. I feel like you can almost always notice work done.
I would say always, yeah.
Maybe nose jobs are the one thing that was like the first that they got right, but almost everything else, any kind of lifts or fillers or whatever. And for me, it's like when I see that in somebody else, like they're trying to appeal more appealing and beautiful and youthful, right? The end result to me is that I can recognize that something is not natural. And my brain, they call it the uncanny valley effect. My brain goes, this is off. Something's weird about this. I'm like missing the humanity almost. Not in a judgmental way, but it's like when you notice somebody has really filled lips, it just doesn't look organic matter. And that actually is more unappealing. I think a lot of guys too, deep down, they just don't say it. It can be a bit off-putting. But I want to go back to the more important discussion that you had, which is if fundamentally you believe that, you would want to change a piece of your body. One, I think it starts the rabbit hole of like, what else do I want to change?
Yes.
And then I would ask you, do you think it ever solves the issue? Like how often do you feel like people solve something and they really feel like they've developed self-worth or self-acceptance through that change?
I think that's only the case if it's like necessary after an accident or some sort of like medical emergency.
Yes.
Like I think that can give someone back a lot of confidence if like they are a burn victim and they can recover a lot of their look as it was before. That is a tremendous positive change and a tremendous confidence gain for them, I think.
That I agree with. I think if it's like fundamentally to look more like yourself again, or to solve a medical issue, absolutely. But purely cosmetic, I really wonder how many people like get something done and then finally say, I feel beautiful, I accepted myself. Like people say it out loud, but do they actually make that internal shift of self-worth?
I mean, I think we both agree that no, they don't.
Probably.
But the thing is, I think that in the short term, it makes them feel really good. And that is dangerous, I think. Like, I think I can relate a little bit to how they feel because when I do sports, I have 10 times more motivation if I have the perfect gear,
Yeah,
like,
sure.
If I feel like I look like a pro athlete, I'm much closer to it than if I feel like, oh, I got the wrong shoes. Oh shit, my t-shirt's all fucked up and like dirty. And I don't feel like Roger Federer, right? Like when I play tennis and I don't look the part. I'm there with hiking boots on the tennis court or something, I feel like that might be a little bit of how they feel. It's like, oh, now I have this new nose and oh, awesome. Now I look beautiful. Now I have this confidence through this external thing. But then at the end of the day, like that's not real.
It goes against what we believe creates self-esteem, which is vulnerability, owning yourself to the world for who you are, including your flaws, right? And putting any kind of protection over that is like avoiding that thing, right? And instead of like owning, hey, I'm not as tall as I could be, but that's okay and I'm comfortable with that, which sends those signals to your brain like, hey, wait a sec, you are okay this way. I think like you are preventing you from ever feeling that exposure and getting comfortable with it. And then it becomes that losing battle because 5 years from now, something else is going to physically change. And if you haven't gotten used to the fundamental idea that I'm okay right now, I think then it just becomes this endless loop. And you see that with a lot of people with plastic surgery, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's just with that old saying, like accept what you can't change, change what you can.
I have one other question. You said what was really interesting is like, is there a line where maybe it could be healthy? So I have two instances on my mind. One, how do we feel about filters constantly, like in everything we do? Like now I've been thinking about this a lot lately is like everything's a filter, right? Like every photo you use, built into every app now is like, smoothness and all this stuff. I almost feel like that becomes the same rabbit hole where you are like, nobody's actually seen what I largely look like online. And it becomes so afraid of showing that. If you're constantly using filters, like you're probably lowering your own self-esteem in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I never thought about it, but that's an interesting thought. And also whether it's a stepping stone towards plastic surgery.
Definitely. I think it's going to be a huge problem in the future with how toxic people are in the comments to everybody. Because like you put on a filter, you look beautiful. Yeah. And still there's going to be a shit ton of people that are just like, oh, you're ugly this way. Or, ooh, this is still gross. So you're like, yeah. I did all this work and I'm still not good enough. What next?
Yeah, totally. Oh my God. And then also like the whole area of people trying to sustain their youth. I think that's going to be a huge field.
That's so true, man. It's really... I think it's tough. I definitely think it's more tough for women because I think they're more judged by it and everything that comes with it is like men wanting younger women and stuff like that. But I think like you have to accept it. Like you have to accept like I'm just never going to look the way I was when I was 22. And the longer you put that off, I think the harder it is to accept. So what about this one other level though? What about something like what Elon Musk did where he spent 20 grand on incredible hair transplant. So he used to be completely balding. Is that a level that is acceptable? Is there a micro level that somehow can still be healthy without going overboard? Or is that still just a way to eventually obscure the problem?
I mean, that's very interesting because I have a friend who works for a clinic that does these kinds of things. And he recently talk to me about it. Kind of like half sale, let's say.
Like, by the way,
half sales thing. Yeah, I haven't got all my hair left, so I can see where it was coming from. But I rejected the offer, even though it was a tremendous offer for what it would be normally. But I just feel like it's a never ending thing, like you're constantly be worried about, do they fall out again? And in the shower, you look like, is there anything in the drain? And then when you comb through, you look at your comb and oh shit, there are 5 more hairs there. And I just don't want to get that started, I know so many people who are bald and I've never thought, that guy looks weird, he's bald, or
me neither.
It's impossible for that dude to get women ever again because he doesn't have his natural hair as he had with 22 anymore. So I just never saw it as that big of a deal. I can see though that it can become a big deal if you tie it to reality. And I want to explain what I mean by that. So when you are younger, let's say, and you always get these this real world feedback of, you're beautiful, you're great, you're amazing, I'm attracted to you, and so on. And then you have that body shift, and then all of a sudden you don't get that anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Then it's very hard not to tie it to that, right? And so that creates a big problem. And I've noticed that in my own thinking that every time a date doesn't work out, I go to that thought of, maybe because I'm bald, But then I'm very good at catching that, fortunately, in the moment, and rationally knowing that that's not the reason.
Yeah.
That's not why the date didn't work out. And so, but one has to be very careful not to have that take over. And I know friends who are obsessed by the thought and it's a dread. I might go bald eventually. They aren't bald by any standards currently, but such a Damocles sword over their head,
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think what's funny is that, like you said, we often make it out to be a way bigger issue than in reality. For example, I personally, like, maybe, okay, height. If somebody was like 5'1" as a guy, that is where you notice, like, wow, that person's short. It doesn't judge them, but like baldness, for example, is one that I think more guys actually worry about than like, I almost never have seen a bald dude and, like you said, been like, oh wow, that's so weird looking. Like, bald is such a normal thing, especially when I think the stats are like 65% of men will start balding at some point by the time they're 50. Like, the majority of men will lose a lot of their hair.
And I certainly think that it's better to shave your head than to run around with that like half bald in that half bald state.
Yes,
because I think that
definitely.
then you look like a real like old motherfucker, you know.
Yeah, when you see a 30-year-old guy who has super wispy comb over and you're like, dude, you just added 20 years to your age, you know?
Yeah, totally. Especially the comb over is horrible.
Oh, God. The big takeaway here is like trying to hide these things that you're embarrassed about, in our opinion, doesn't seem to create any lasting self-worth or self-esteem, and it becomes something that you always chase. And I think the opposite of owning it and showing up to the world and facing it subconsciously tells yourself, like, I am good enough as I am, and I'm okay the way that I look, and I'm comfortable with what I'm presenting to the world. And I think that's the quickest way to get over it. Like, I've been super impressed, man. I know that you're much more comfortable with yourself. To be honest, like, I'd like to say that I would be as comfortable as you are as quickly, but I think
like
the way,
boldness, you mean?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think, like, taking to heart what you did of just like owning it and shaving it and not trying to obscure it is probably always going to be the best path, whether it's balding or plastic surgery or face. Like, I don't think there's any other way.
Like, I think people should give stuff a try sometimes. Like, long before I ever suspected that I would ever go bald, I shaved my head completely just to see like what it's like to deal with that situation, you know? And I think
totally.
like that would be an interesting experience for a lot of people. Like, really test your confidence. You know, can you be your same confident self without hair?
So own what you have. Instead of trying to fix it with some short-term plastic surgery or some Band-Aid, show up to the world, accept yourself, do that a few times. That confidence that's going to translate, that's what's going to make you more attractive to anybody than any procedure could.